Good morning. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee on March 22nd. This open meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and is being held by video conference. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via Zoom as identified on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Please be aware other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Present.
I don't see Peter Brace. Matt Fee.
Present.
We know that Ian Golding, Jen Carver, and Fritz McClure are not able to join us today. Joanna Roach.
Here.
So we do have a quorum with 5 members present. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And Holly Backus.
Present.
Thank you. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. So we have today Steve Mckenna for the Cape Cod and Islands Regional Coordinator from the Mass Office of Coastal Zone Management. Steve, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we also have Claire Martin from Remain Nantucket. Claire?
Thank you for having us.
And are there other members of the Remain team who are going to be speaking today?
I believe it'll just be myself and our partners at EVP, and that is they're represented by Brett, who is here.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm not, there's Brett Piercy. Do you want, can you unmute and just let us know that your connection is working?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude the remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute yourself on your phone or computer when you're not speaking. And for any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please remember to do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Thank you all for joining us on this lovely morning. And the first item on our agenda is the discussion with Steve Mckenna from CZM about the grant program and the fit what we might see between that and particular with the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. Steve, again, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the grant program at the Coastal Zone Management Office.
Sure. So we have a grant program. It's called the Coastal Resilience Grant Program. It's kind of for the basics. It's a municipal grant program open to the 78 coastal communities in Massachusetts, as well as to nonprofits who own coastal real estate that's open to the public. It's a 1-year grant program. It operates on a reimbursement basis. It's deliverable based and requires a 25% match. The good part is that match can be both in kind and or cash match as well. And we fund a wide range of resilience projects on it, going all the way from initial sort of risk vulnerability assessment, going up kind of then through the spectrum for projects, feasibility analysis, design, permitting, and then eventually to implementation. We also fund a class of projects which are green infrastructure projects, which are really nature-based type focus. That's a narrower sector projects, but we fund those as well. So kind of a whole host of range of resilience efforts, from planning and conceptual to actually construction. The grant award last year, we had a cap of $1 million for an award. The RFR hasn't come out yet for this year. The RFR is usually released in mid-April with a submission date usually towards the end of May. There's a lot up in the air this year in terms of potential changes. The cap may go up to as high as $2 million. We're waiting to see if that happens. And we don't have a funding amount yet. Typically, we fund close to $3 to $4 million worth of projects, depending on our budget statewide. There's the potential that could be increased due to federal infrastructure funds, but we have no idea if that's going to happen this year or not. Those are kind of the basics of the grant program. And I'm happy to answer any questions or brainstorm about ideas. I've talked to Vince about potential downtown, looking at Bridge Street and, or that area down there. But I can be a resource, sort of answer questions on how a project might be shaped to better fit our grant program, or provide input on how to maybe break it up into fundable pieces. A lot of these larger scale projects, they're done in phases, and both because of the limitations of our budget, the limitations of 12 months, which is actually really comes down to about 9 months in reality by the time we get contracted and so forth. So there's just practical limitations of how much you can get done in a grant cycle. So I can provide some input on how best to sort of package a proposal as well, depending on what you're thinking.
Thank you, Steve. And you said it's a reimbursable grant, so that means that the town pays the expenses up front and then gets reimbursed later. Is that correct?
Correct. And that can be on a rolling basis. Some communities, they just do the whole project. They've got the funds and submit a reimbursement at the end of the project. Others with less capital to work with, as deliverables come in, they're paid and they submit a reimbursement for us, which takes about a month to get reimbursed. So depending on the community, we could operate either way.
Great. And Vince, you had a conversation with Steve. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure, but before I get onto that, I was just going to say, well, I suppose it's pertinent now. The conversation we had was about the downtown flood barrier. It was about a lot of things, but that was kind of the core topic that we ended up discussing. And Mary, if it's okay with you, I could put up the image on screen from the Coast Resilience Plan about the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. That was a recommendation.
Thank you, Vince. I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. So if you can see this, just moving a few things. This is the Coastal Resilience Plan. This is page 145 of the Coastal Resilience Plan. We discussed several of the items that were recommendations in the Coastal Resilience Plan. South Shore ideas, areas like Nantucket, Sacajah Pond, those kind of things. And
can you go to full screen on that?
Beg your pardon, and yes, I can. Better?
We're still seeing the slides down the left and the, so just, but it certainly is adequate. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. And once we were trying to understand some of the requirements and goals, frankly, from CZM and how they like to have their project structured and the requirements they need met, this seems like a very good fit for a number of reasons. It serves an area with substantial coastal risk. It serves some of the largest population on Nantucket. It basically serves everybody. It makes the area resilient. It is largely focused on infrastructure and making the infrastructure resilient, and trying to make sure that we have access routes, getting to and from the ferry services being the most vital service on the island for goods and services coming in. When we were discussing this with Steve and his team, I say we, I say I, beg your pardon. I was trying to get across some of the risks, some of the factors, some of the phasing that might have to take place, and the fact that this is an immensely large project. And what we were discussing was a feasibility study, just to try and see the practicalities of it, the basics, understand that. Do public engagement, a great deal of public engagement, to try and understand the people that would be impacted, the people that would benefit from it, the people that would need to have agreements with the town in place, or organizations, as the case may be, for the property owners where this may cross property that isn't town property. Then understand the routing more thoroughly. Is this the most viable route? Is there a better route? Is there a different alternative route that could make the area more resilient and have lesser impacts, say on, oh, I don't know, ecological habitats, or on access routes, or on particular landowners, or whatever the case may be. So the thought came about for undertaking quite a substantial 1 year, effectively, engineering feasibility assessment and routing assessment to see how this might work. That seems to fit quite well with the CZM goals from the initial conversation we had. Does that all ring true with you, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's based on, we're working similar type projects in a couple of communities. One, Tisbury, and they've got some of the same things, you know, ferry landing right there. They've got a lot of flooding, both coastal and also rainwater flooding. Big area, combination of public-private infrastructure, public-private ownership. So we're on completing the second phase, the second year of funding for that project. And this started the same way, with an initial, essentially a feasibility analysis to see what potentially what are the alternatives that might be able to be done. Sometimes that involves breaking up the area into smaller subsets, but that looks at that. And then now they've been slowed down by the pandemic, but they're starting a pretty aggressive community outreach phase, because at a certain point you need the both buy-in and the partnership of some of these private properties if you're going to sort of manage this as kind of a whole unit versus, you know, on a parcel level, which doesn't frequently solve the problem. We're doing the same thing with Woods Hole, that community as well. It's a public-private partnership as well. And so, yeah, I think that this is, you know, very similar in a lot of that, those aspects. And because especially as an island, I think this is even more critical infrastructure. I know from when we look at resilience projects, this would rise right up there, because, you know, impacts to that ferry service, for starters, it has a huge impact on the island, as well as the business community impacts to those. And, you know, some of the things that we're seeing from some of the other projects that we're funding, things such as, you know, standards of design, elevation standards, so that, you know, as work goes on piecemeal at different properties, there's at least a certain level that they're trying to raise up, elevate infrastructure, roadways, properties too, so that over time, you've got a more consistent elevation towards a short face, and you don't have these, you know, low areas, potential flood routes. And that's one of the things that I think you guys have a leg up on. A number of years ago, we funded a flood pathways studies for the downtown area. So that information is kind of some of the first step that you look at when you start, you know, this feasibility analysis. So again, I think that's just one more piece of the puzzle that you guys have already have, and that would help advance this a little bit quicker.
Steve, if I can ask, how competitive is this grant program? You know, you get 100 applications and you can only fund 3, or?
No, it, you know, it varies by year, but we've been fortunate. We've been able to fund better than 50% of the proposals on a given year. And that was last year was the most competitive. We had 43 proposals statewide. Other years we've funded a much higher rate of that. Every year, I think it gets more competitive as more communities get further down the road. And you know, what we're seeing now, initially there was lots of planning grants, feasibility, type stuff. Projects now, we're going into our 10th season this year. So projects have been developed more and they're coming in for implementation monies, which are bigger awards. So there may not be as many awards in the past on a given year, but it varies, but it's not what I would say ultra competitive in the sense that, we're funding 10% of the proposals.
Great, thank you. So we have some questions, Sarah Boyce and then Gary Beller. Vince, if you can take the screen share down.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you to Steve. You answered a lot of my questions because I was thinking, I was kind of wanting to take a step back from the downtown project and thinking of what projects are the most competitive. But you just stated that this project, talking about the feasibility of the downtown area, we recognize that this is obviously a huge need and such a big project that we need to do a multi-stage approach and really kind of assess even what's possible, and then the outreach component. So you it was really nice to hear that that's already happening in Woods Hole, and kind of we can look at that as a model in some way. But because my initial question was in terms of the likelihood of funding, we have projects or some that are closer to boots on the ground, and I was interested if there was more preference to some of those projects where we can sort of more immediately do something. This type of project that, Vince and you talked about, and that Vince was just presenting on, is more of that planning and feasibility and multi-stage and many layers and many years. And I was just curious on, how that's viewed with CZM.
Good question. Right now, I think there is a preference towards sort of shovel-ready projects, if you will. That being said, I think what makes you guys stand out is that you're an island. You don't have, shared support that so many other communities have. I think, whatever you come forward with as a priority would be looked on, would score that much higher just because of the, resilience is everything when you're out there alone. So I think you guys have a unique position, like call it a competitive advantage or whatever you want. But I think the reviewers certainly recognize the differences between, that you guys and other communities. So while there is, I think, a preference for maybe shovel-ready projects and implementation, would want to back whatever is your priority. And so I wouldn't make it on, because shovel-ready, it's from a competitive advantage, would submit that. Would really like you to look at, whichever one in your deliberations find is the most critical. And, would certainly want to fund either one of them.
Thank you, Steve. And Gary?
Yes, just two questions, maybe for Vince. First question is, what would the funding be, in your view, be needed to do this feasibility study? How much would you think it would need to do this? And two, is it likely that if we were successful in getting approved for this funding, that you think we could do this feasibility study in a year? You think, by the end of starting 1 year and finishing it, we would have a pretty good idea of what is feasible and what is not feasible in terms of those dramatic plans that we've been looking at?
Thank you, Gary. So this is when we started working this up with Trevor Johnson from Arcadis. We have a preliminary budget at this stage of in mind of about $300,000. And just for Steve's benefit, and the simple mathematics of it, that would put the town at somewhere around $75,000 for cash or in-kind services, which and whatever breakdown that might be. That's the way we're thinking about it. To get a $300,000 project done in a year, well, we got a CRP, which was a $500,000 project done in just a bit over a year. So fingers crossed we would have a very good go at it. The thing is, we also have quite a lot of lead-in information from Arcadis, whoever the consultant for this one would be. maybe Arcadis, maybe not, who knows? I can't rub that crystal ball and tell anyone just yet. The thing is, we have the information, we have the risk assessments, we know a lot of this stuff, we have all of the tax assessors information, so we know the parcel ownership. I've been building good relationships with a lot of the property owners in this area over the last many years to try and shorten the contact time, which can take time. So it is feasible to get done in 9 months. It would be an aggressive project. There is no doubt in that fact, but it is feasible to get done in 9 months.
Thank
Mary,
you.
the third part of that question is, if we were successful, A, in getting the grant, and B, in accomplishing what we intended, was to get this feasibility study completed in a year, when we then go back to the state, go back to Steve for the next grant, which would be more shovel ready based on the fact that we have now done a feasibility study which shows these things work, or certain things will work. Will that help us get the next grant, which would be more a type of a shovel ready grant, because the feasibility would have shown that this can be accomplished? Would that be a help?
For my part, yeah, we typically, if we fund a project start out, like a first phase, understanding it'd be a multi-phase project, unless there's a big issue, something happens, the town, the consultant, something's not going well, we generally try to continue the funding. And it's been an exception that we haven't once we take on a town to begin a project. So it's not a given, but it's very likely that continuing phases would be. And again, back to the uniqueness of Nantucket, resilience is everything, being alone out there. I think you'd be in good shape for continued funding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Other questions from committee members? And I'll note that Peter Brace was able to join us early on. I apologize, I didn't catch the time, but welcome, Peter. Questions from members of the public in attendance on this topic? No, Steve, anything else you want to communicate to us? And again, thank you for joining us this morning.
No, the one thing I'd say, as you're working with whatever consultant you are to put together a proposal, right up until the release of the RFR, we can be consulted. I'd strongly encourage that, because my experience, sometimes the consultants will put a lot of stuff in there, maybe be over realistic about what can be accomplished, and also budget wise, not be looking at trying to keep a project very competitive from a budget standpoint. So we can give you a pretty good sounding board of what we think a budget range might be for a project like this, what we've seen in other communities, so that at least we're a sounding board to a community before they put a proposal in. So I just encourage that.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate all of the forthrightness and encouragement that you're offering for the program. Vince, a final question?
Thank you, Mary. So just a simple question for Steve. Say if we did go through this process, we did complete it, and getting to next June of 2023, and then we had another project or two in mind to continue on from this one, but we realized that the expense was going to be enormous for if we ever got to a construction phase. Would it be beneficial to do 1 or 2 phases with CZM to get a good design in hand? And then would it be something that CZM could support, that we would eventually have to go for federal funding to pay for the construction phase?
Absolutely. We've been used a lot like that. We've done, funded the preliminary design, permitting. The revetment around East Chop comes to mind. It's a huge multi-million, I think it's like a $13 million project. We've helped them get to a certain phase, and then it gets beyond our means. And, they're looking at Army Corps and I think FEMA funds right now. So yeah, short answer is, yeah, we could definitely stage that. The other thing I think you might want to consider, we will, just starting last year, we'll fund a 2-year award So for planning grant like this, and when I think the community outreach piece is really important, might be a real benefit for you folks, because the way it works, if it's just on a one-year grant cycle, the project finishes up June 30th, gets recontracted again early fall. You've missed the summer season to have some potential outreach when there's a lot of people that you might want to be reaching there. Also for planning purposes, I think it just helps if you can know that there's, you're granted a 2-year cycle. So, when I look at this, I think it'd be a good candidate to request a 2-year award, which is, it's actually 2 single-year contracts, but you're funded for the second piece of it. And I could work with you to help shape that, but that would be probably my recommendation.
Last question, if I may, Mary.
Yes, go ahead, Vince.
This is kind of a greedy question on my part. Do you have any idea when the RFR might come out, just so we can understand when we can keep asking questions, Steve?
Yeah, we're typically it's mid-April, and once it reaches a certain point, it goes from our shop up to EEA, and we lose all control of it. So we don't have a date certain. And the way it works is usually, the secretary has some event somewhere down in New Bedford or something, and they combine it and they announce a grant award. So we can give you a close idea, but at a certain point, we just don't know. So the earlier, the better on consultation.
And if we could just clarify, RFR stands for what?
RFR, request for response, or RFP, request for proposals.
Thank you. All right, well, Steve, we appreciate your help this morning, and you'll be hopeful to be working with you.
Fantastic, I hope so, and good luck.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone.
All right, next item on our agenda is a presentation from Claire Martin of Remain Nantucket and Brett Piercy of EBP on the results of the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge survey. This was a follow-up to the first survey, so this was their second survey. Claire?
Yes, thank you, Mary. For those who don't know me, Claire Martin, project manager at Remain Nantucket, largely overseeing the design studio called the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge for the last nearly 2 years. This survey that we are really excited to share the results of today, as Mary said, was the second in 2 surveys. The first survey last winter, as you may recall, was intended to measure baseline attitudes on climate among Nantucket residents, visitors. This was year-round and seasonal Nantucketers. We ran a second survey this year in an effort to measure the impact, not only the impact of the design studio and community engagement campaign that we ran. For us at Remain, that was really important to measure and understand who we reached, how that might have impacted the community, but also understanding that over the past 2+ years, there have been so many incredible efforts, initiatives, projects, CRP happening on islands. So knowing that this survey would be a measure of that. This second survey, in the response rate, we more than doubled those who participated. We think that alone demonstrates an engaged community. People are paying attention. We really credit that uptick to the outreach and marketing that many of our partner organizations did in newsletters, social media. We had 2 survey links that were able to track where those responses were coming from, which I'll let Brett get into more. So without giving away too many of the results, I do just want to say that by next week, we plan to have a full package of the report, a press release, a quick fact sheet, and hopefully an infographic to be shared widely with the public. We hope and think this will be a really great tool for a lot of organizations on island, and are excited to share with you the results. So I'll introduce Brett from EBP. They are a research and analysis firm based out of Boston, who we've worked with many times over the last years at Remain, and they're just a great partner and they do really great work. So Brett, I will hand it over to you to share the results.
Super, yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna try to share my screen here. I've got a couple choices of screens. We want to share this one. Okay, so hopefully everybody's seeing kind of an introductory slide there. Super. So yeah, thanks for having us today. I'm really excited to talk about this survey. As Claire noted, the results of this survey are really informative about the attitudes that are on Nantucket toward climate change and coastal resilience topics. So let's see. What I wanted to talk about today, just kind of, I guess Claire kind of gave you a good introduction to the study purpose, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about who responded, and then walk you through some of the interesting findings and then comparisons between the first survey and the second survey. The results were actually fairly similar, despite the huge response, particularly to the second survey, the huge increase in response, which is a good sign. It kind of shows that those results are consistent. So we're gonna talk about attitudes toward climate change, attitudes regarding impacts of climate change on Nantucket, people's level of engagement with climate change, attitudes toward different individual adaptations that they can take, attitudes about community actions that can be taken to prepare for climate change. And then the survey asked some questions, the second survey asked some questions about the coastal resilience plan. So we can take a look at the answers to those. And then we'll wrap up talking about people's participation in some of the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge activities and events that occurred over the past, most of 2021 anyway. And then we'll just talk about some conclusions, kind of wrap it all up. Claire mentioned a lot of this already, the first of two surveys. The first survey was administered early January 2021 through the first, February 1st. And that gave us a good baseline. And then the second survey was administered this past January through February 10th. And we were looking for, it was, a lot of the content was the same as what we asked in the original survey, but then we introduced some questions to look at some changes in people's level of engagement and attitudes on the topic since the, between the first and second surveys. This is the demographics, this is who responded to the second survey. Over half of the respondents were year-round residents. We got a good group, 41% of part-time or seasonal residents, and then a sliver here of frequent visitors who they don't own or rent, but they're frequent visitors. And we had a good representation across the different neighborhoods. As you can see, the two top town and mid-island neighborhoods, these are each 100 people each. So, good response across the different neighborhoods there. And there were some differences in the demographic characteristics of the respondents versus the Nantucket population. This was true in the first survey and the second as well. There was a much higher percentage of females, of female respondents in the survey. Which for some reason I don't have that number ahead of me, but and then the population was also older, wealthier, and more highly educated than the Nantucket. So the graph that you're looking at here shows the age distribution, and the green bars are the original survey, and the red one is the most recent survey. And then this blue bar is Nantucket's population as a whole. So as you can see, a lot of participation in the age, 50 to 60, and then the 70 and over, and less participation in these other groups. And then I included the wealth distribution as well, because you can see, pretty significant difference in here. The education graph, looks very similar to this. And these were, there was some change from the second to the first survey, but it kind of, the population who responded was a little bit older, a little bit wealthier, and a little bit more highly educated to the second survey. So the way that we assessed basic attitudes toward climate change, we used the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications programs, 6 America's Super Short Survey, YAY, which they call SASSY. It's an audience segmentation tool designed to help people understand climate change views. It was developed from an original questionnaire that had like 36 questions. And over time, they realized they could really reduce it to just 4 questions and classify people into these 6 groups: alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and then dismissive, people who don't think it's happening at all or don't think it's man-made. So when this survey was most recently administered to the national population, about 33% of Americans fell into the group of alarmed. And as I show you, that percentage is much higher on Nantucket. So the green bar is the first survey, the red bars are the second survey, and the blues are the nation as a whole in 2021. So, you know, there's a slight difference in some of these between the first and second surveys, but they're not really appreciable. I wouldn't say there was a decline in the level of alarm here between the first and second surveys. Huge percentage of Nantucket's visitors and residents fall into the alarmed and concerned categories. And then likewise at the lower end, really small percentages falling into the doubtful and dismissive. So that's really important to know for future outreach and communications. These are generally the population you're dealing with, is people who are already alarmed and concerned and really want to know what to do. So we asked them. This, unfortunately, it's not the greatest slide. Hopefully, we'll be able to see like the full results when the report comes out and look a little bit more in detail. But we asked people a series of questions about their attitudes on climate change on Nantucket itself. And what we found are, so they were asked to rank their level of agreement on a scale of 1, disagree, strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, and then strongly agree. And so we scored that on a scale of 1 to 5 and then took the average. So when you see these numbers at the very top that are 4, 4.5, that indicates a very strong level of agreement and not very much dissent with those statements. When you see these at the bottom, there's some people in this group that are disagreeing with that topic and not so many people who are really strongly agreeing with that topic. So it's important to note the strong support for government actors on Nantucket. And you see that in this first question: it is appropriate for government actors on Nantucket to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And then also strong support for the statement: it is appropriate for government to create uniform policies to coordinate a comprehensive community response to climate change. And then with attitudes toward like how tax dollars might be spent to respond, there was a little bit of a difference in attitude regarding, so this fourth from the bottom that I have circled: it is appropriate for the town of Nantucket to spend tax dollars to protect island businesses from sea level rise. And there's a fair amount of agreement with that statement. And then it is appropriate for the town of Nantucket to spend tax dollars to protect island homes from sea level rise. And you see kind of a difference, a lower level of support than you saw for businesses. So that's something to keep in mind. Oops, trigger finger. So we asked people how they would rate. In the second survey, we were able to ask them how would they rate their level of engagement with climate change over the past 12 to 16 months, if there's been a change. And what we saw was that an overwhelming proportion indicated that they were somewhat more engaged or much more engaged. And then, a third of people had no level of engagement. And we had really small numbers of people who felt that they were less engaged or somewhat less engaged, which is exciting to see. So then we asked people what what led you to, if you indicated that you had a change in your level of engagement, what led to that? And we gave them some suggested, was it storm events? Was it some press coverage, community efforts and events, town planning, and then a personal experience or other? And you can see a lot of people were influenced by weather and storm events. And I understand that there's sort of been significant amounts of flooding in the downtown. So perhaps that, weighed in a lot in increasing people's level of engagement there. And then for personal experience, we let people write in what their personal experience might be. And a lot of people, talked about, I've walked my dog in this area for 20 years and now it's, eroded. The trails are gone where there used to be trails and things. And just different areas that they visit, and they've just really observed these over a long period of time, changes in how their island is being impacted by severe weather events. So we next asked people about a series of individual adaptations that they can take. Are they willing to elevate their home? Would they consider wet or dry floodproofing, raising or protecting their mechanical utilities, installing rain gardens? And what you see here, so the red bars are the people who are opposed to these items, and the yellow is that I gave them gold because that's a gold star for already having done it. We see a lot of support for kind of the more low impact, installing a rain garden. A lot of people are willing to consider that. A small percentage of them have already made that kind of adaptation to their house. And not very many people aren't willing to consider that sort of thing. And the same with raising and protecting their utilities and dry floodproofing. And then when you get to wet floodproofing, and particularly elevating your home, a lot more people not considering it at all. And when from the write-in answers, it appears, this 4% of people who've already done that, that's about 25 people who've already raised their homes. That's a significant number of people to undertake a pretty significant effort. It's possible that the people in this 58% of people who wouldn't consider elevating their home have already done so, and so they don't feel the need to do that. And people also may be recognizing the fact that there's not it's a big logistical challenge, and there might not necessarily be a place for them to move to. So I think that's important information when you're looking at how people are thinking about what their response might be to different impacts of climate change. And then, so this is a group of community level actions that people can take to prepare for climate change, or communities can take. Raise sidewalks in neighborhoods, public rain gardens, tidal surge barriers, using oyster reefs and living shorelines. And as you can see, there's a lot of support for nearly all of these. The one item that it doesn't look like a lot of people are necessarily opposed to raising the sidewalks in neighborhoods. Because such a high percentage of people aren't sure about it, I think that if people knew more about this, then it would probably have stronger support, like these other items. So, but this 21% of people who aren't sure, a lot of those people probably aren't sure what's involved in that. People wrote in a number of suggestions for things that they think the community could do to prepare for climate change. They were similar on both the first survey and the second survey. They ranged from deploying rain barrels throughout the island, erosion control, dune and beach renourishment, education and informational campaigns, restricting development from vulnerable areas. So people were, I think it was nearly 100 people wrote in their own, suggestions for action. So people are clearly looking and have their own ideas about things that they think could be done. Now, the town of Nantucket's coastal resilience plan, which I mean, really just was released, we asked respondents if they had read or reviewed it, and 60% of respondents reported that they had, which is really tremendous, particularly since it was so recently released. Then we asked if they agree with the town of Nantucket's policy to prepare for approximately 9 feet of sea level rise by 2100. And as you can see, a really strong agreement, a big proportion of people in this strongly agree and agree group. Some comments, we allowed people to write in, what, just, give us some comments on their agreement about that. And one comment was pretty short-sighted not to prepare at this point. And then the comments from people who neither agree nor disagree, this 19% here. Some people were just concerned that the 9 feet wouldn't be sufficient and that 2100 might be too late. And others indicated that they really hadn't reviewed the plan in enough detail to form an opinion. So those who disagree or strongly disagree primarily talked about, these are our climate change skeptics, people who they either don't believe it's happening or don't believe that it's man-made. And then some people, they seem to agree that it's happening and man-made, but they doubted our institutions, I guess, the capability of our institutions to respond properly. But this is a very small percentage of people who are in that group there. So we then asked them for the 18 priority 1 priorities in the coastal resilience plan. We asked them to indicate which were their top priorities. And as you can see, these first 4, the steamboat wharf resilience and elevation planning, downtown neighborhood flood barrier feasibility study for Easy Street, updates to zoning bylaws to limit growth in high-risk areas, and create a coastal resilience and sustainability program. Really strong support for the, a lot of people chose those as their top priorities. And then some lower levels of support for these or people indicating these as being their top priorities. However, it's entirely possible, some of these, the names, either they're not very descriptive or they kind of don't sound very exciting. So it's completely possible that people may find these other activities very important, perhaps if they knew more about them. So we asked if they might support a new funding model to pay for the types of infrastructure and preparations that would be needed to prepare the island. And really strong support for this. About 70% of respondents were in favor. And then, 22% of people who weren't in favor or against, and then a small group of people again who are against and strongly against it. So I think this really shows that people are, recognizing that this issue takes, it's going to take working together and also some funds. And then the last group of questions we asked was about attendance at the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge activities, events and exhibitions that I mentioned took place throughout 2021. And so about just under a third of respondents had attended at least one of these events, with the most popular event being the Envision Resilience Designs for Living with Rising Seas exhibition that ran July through December 2021 at the Thomas Macy Warehouse. And then also lots of people reported having seen the Rising Above Easy Street light show in October 2021. So, overall, these results really show that the Nantucket community is alarmed by climate change and that they're increasingly engaged on the topic. They've exhibited their engagement by attending events and exhibitions and by having reviewed the town's coastal resilience plan. They continue to be prepared and take individual action. They see a role for town government in preparing the community, though there's a little bit of a difference in how the public money should be spent, whether it should be spent on businesses, and more disagreement about whether it should be spent on protecting homes. And then, these results reflect that people are aware of the challenges ahead and willing to work together to take action. So if you have more questions about the survey results, this is our contact information. So feel free to reach out to me after Claire.
Thank you very much, Brett. And thank you to Remain for sponsoring the survey and including the Coastal Resilience Plan. It's really wonderful to see that people are engaging with that. Are there plans to continue the survey at a certain frequency? I wonder, if we keep doing this, what we'll see.
That's a great question, Mary. It has certainly come up, and we have, discussed among ourselves. I think yes and no. We don't have set plans to continue. We are certainly interested to continue to track levels of engagement and these attitudes over time. I think these results alone after 1 year are telling, and it would be quite interesting to see how that trend does or does not continue. The questions are all public. Always happy to share those if any group wants to take this on maybe next year, or if it's a collaborative effort. The report is, we're going to share all of that publicly. So open to collaborating on another survey in the future, but no set plans at the moment.
Thank you. I know there are many things on your plate.
It's an important effort, though.
Did you want to add anything else from Remain's perspective about how the survey would be used, or what value you tend to get from the results?
For us personally at Remain, we were most interested in the attitudes and really the level of engagement. The community engagement effort was a key pillar of the entire Envision Resilience Challenge initiative. That was really why the challenge was started, was, what is Remain's response going to be? How can we help spread the awareness, share resources that are already happening on the island? Might our efforts impact the way that people think about the future, in a more resilient or more positive light? So for us, seeing that the results from the first survey and the survey affirmed what we had hoped, and that there are people paying attention. We are really, really thrilled with the response rate. Last year, if you'll remember, we had either 303 or 313 usable responses. This year, we had over 700 come in, and once those were kind of cleaned for dupes and duplicates and surveys that were incomplete, we had 679. It's off season, it's January, and people are really willing to take the survey. And I think even more so than just complete the survey, as Brett pointed out, on all of the options to write in, people really took the time to share their thoughts. We're hoping to kind of formulate some of those. We have one quote here that was in the report, just real admiration for all of the conservation groups and the efforts that are happening. Many of your names were mentioned, what has caused you to become more engaged, and a lot of individual names, groups. So a lot of kudos really just to the island-wide effort around coastal resilience.
Great, thank you, Claire. Any questions or comments from committee members? Matt?
Yeah, how representative of the island do you think it is? Do you think you've got a broad cross section, or do you think you have sort of a biased, self-selected group?
That's a great question. I'll let maybe Brett, I think, Brett, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I do. I do think there's some bias. I think that if we had a more representative group, some of the results might be less extreme. But I think that this is definitely, this is a big population on the island. I think that these are the attitudes that would be, that you would find if you were to just kind of, maybe pick 10 people off the street. This is more or less representative of what you would see.
Thank you, Brett. Claire, was the survey available in Spanish? And if it was, do you have a tally of how many responses were in Spanish?
Yes, great question. It was available in Spanish, and I believe last year we had 1 response in Spanish, and I believe this year was 4. Is that correct, Brett?
That's right, yep.
And maybe with, if there were to be a future survey, Matt, hoping that we could cast a wider net. We did a big campaign push this time around. We had 2 paid ads in Current and Daybreak throughout the 2-week period. But really a lot of our responses came in organically through partner newsletters and social media.
Great, thank you.
Just to follow up, I'm not being critical. I just think we have to be realistic that I think you guys did a great job. I think the survey is great, but if it's at 70%, maybe it's really only at 50. It's I think you'd have to dumb them down a little bit for the people that didn't respond and didn't have any idea. But I think overall, if people are aware we're going to have an issue. It's in the paper all the time, and I think there's a few more skeptics out there than you've captured, maybe. But overall, I think it's great.
I think that's true. Although one of the groups that unfortunately wasn't well represented was sort of the millennial age group and the folks that are younger than that. And those people tend to be really engaged in these issues. So I agree with you that it would be less. And I agree with you that there might be a little bit more dissent in the community than perhaps these results show. But I still think there's a population of particularly maybe the young people who would show certainly this level of support.
Yeah, I noticed as well that the 19 to 24 age group was the least representation. And one guess off the top of my head was, well, maybe they're away at college and didn't see the announcement of the survey or didn't have time in the midst of their studies to respond to it. But yes, that's a group that I would like to see a lot more response from, so that we would have a better idea of how that group felt.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And the report does delve into, making clear that there could be a larger group of those who dissent that did not take part in the survey. Though among those groups, we did see an uptick, which I think that also is worth mentioning and highlighting, that among the group of perhaps disbelievers or those who might not support some of these initiatives, they did take time to take the survey, which is important. So they're at least engaged in talking about their thoughts on it, whether they agree or don't agree.
Yes. Other comments or questions? Gary, and then Joanna. Gary, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was amazed that according to your results, you had over 40% participation from non-residents. Considering the dates that you chose, mid-January, I can't think of any time of the year when there would be less likely to have non-resident involvement than those dates. And I guess had you done that survey in June, the results may well have been far more voluminous, and maybe the same or maybe not the same, but still, as I say, I'm surprised that there were over 40% indicating that they were non-residents, including a bunch of people in Brand Point. I know I'm from Brand Point, and there's nobody there in January. I mean, there is nobody there. They don't deliver mail. It's really quiet there. So also the other comment I had is that when you first look at the survey and you talk about climate change, in most cases, when you talk about climate change, people don't always think about rising tides and storm surges. They think about, non-using equipment that fouls the atmosphere. And so people are much more concerned, and that's why we're turning to electric vehicles and things like that. However, on Nantucket, I think we're different. I think that probably when you're thinking about climate change, you really are talking about rising tides and storm surge. So, and I can see from your responses that that's what a lot have people have on their mind when you think about climate change. It's the coastal resilience issues.
Thank you, Gary. Joanna and then Peter.
I had some similar comments. First, thank you for doing this. It's really appreciated and good to have the feedback, right? But I think I'm thinking a little bit similarly to Matt and have a couple of maybe suggestions. I don't know if you have any plans to do more around this particular thing, but I do think that there's a couple of other groups that would be interesting to survey. One of which would be the high school students, right? Maybe even down to the middle school. And if you simplified the survey a little bit, I think it would be really interesting to see what they have to say about this, also because they're listening to their parents, but yet they have their own opinions. And there is quite an active youth climate group in the high school. The second thought I had was to send this out to the families of the people who go to the Boys and Girls Club, because I think that that is a really representative group of the diversity in our population. And you may be able, especially if it went out in Spanish, you may be able to also get a snapshot of what that thinking is. And then those perspectives could potentially be balanced with the work that you just did, if that makes sense at all.
That's a great suggestion, Jenna. That was one group. We did, share the survey with the Youth Climate Committee. I don't know if we know how many results came in from that group, not very many. We did not share our list with the Boys and Girls Club. We did circulate the survey through several church lists and a few landscaping groups. But I think the Boys and Girls Club would be a great way to be, really representative. That's a good idea.
I will just follow up about the other way to get to, I think, the student population would be through Acclimate. That group works specifically with Mandy Bardsley, who does all the curriculum development, and she could potentially get it to the teachers at least, and also the kid, and through her curriculum development around coastal resiliency and climate change, she could make a case for getting that out to the whole school.
That would be, who did we did share it with one of the science teachers at the high school, and asked it to be circulated. But again,
Claire, happy to help you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joanna.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joanna. And Peter Bryce, question.
Yes. Did I see right? Total return surveys was 679. Is that correct?
Yes, usable surveys.
And so are you guys satisfied that that's enough people that you can get a sense that that's what all of Nantucketers and all visitors feel about? And then if not, will you continue to do the survey and update it and take suggestions from us to get to this group or get to that group, go to the Civic League, get it distributed to all the members, find a way to get a much bigger survey? Is that in the plans?
We are certainly open to any of that. And I think that the best effort here would be collaboration, having several committee and organization names on a survey like this, maybe increasing, the time that the survey is open. There was a mention from Gary about the time of year. We did talk about that last year. The reason we chose June to February again was just, to follow up exactly 1 year later. But if we think that a summertime or springtime or maybe even fall would garner a larger response, it would be really interesting to talk that through. I think the goal would be to get as accurate a representative response as possible. So I think we're certainly open, to talking through what that might look like.
So I just have one follow-up and then I give the, so do you have plans to maybe continue well into the future to do the survey? Because as sea level effects increase, you may get more, I don't know, just it may be a good thing to know, as we lose a neighborhood or a certain thing is affected more because of sea level rise, things become more urgent. I just think it'd be good to know how people are, I saw in there that high number of people don't want to raise their house. Well, Gary Beller's summer neighborhood, I think those people in that neighborhood are if they have that attitude's going to change over time, I think, be good to know that. Same thing with Nantucket. You know, all the places that are low lying. I just think that the survey would be something that we do on a regular basis, if that's possible. Thank you.
I think that I'll let Cecil jump in. I see her hand is up maybe on this question. Again, we don't have anything in the works or planned at the moment, but do feel as though this is a very important tool that would, you know, answer all of those questions, Peter. So I think we are certainly willing to, you know, share the questions from this survey, collaborate on another survey down the road. Cecil, did you have similar thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, the reason we did the survey, just to put it all into perspective, was really to measure the impact of Envision Resilience. And our Envision Resilience program has an end date. It's, you know, we have now pretty much completed our Envision Resilience project. So it was, as you recall, it was a design studio, it was a community engagement effort, and it was a survey. And we wanted to measure before the event, before the project, and at the end of the project. So that was the reason that we did this survey. And because of that, with that understanding, we're actually really psyched that we got 679 surveys responded. And from what Brett and her colleagues have told us, that number is a very good percentage of our overall population. So we can feel pretty good about that, those responses being, you know, with plus or minus a little bit, a pretty good, accurate read on how our community feels about sea level rise and climate change. Now, everybody knows that Remain is our number one priority as an organization is to support other efforts on the island. You know, so if you, Mary, and your team came to us and said, we would like to continue to do this survey, we would like to try to run it at a different time of the year using the baseline information that the first two surveys that we have established as a way to measure different changes, knowing that it was a January survey, knowing that it had a limited scope as part of Envision Resilience. So we would absolutely help you if you wanted to take it over and run a survey and try to get a different group of respondees. And that may have great value to you, but just so you know, the reason that we did it was really had a very limited scope. And I just wanted to say that I think the results of the Envision Resilience project definitely was informed by all of the other work and the participants who were involved in climate change and coastal resilience preparedness over the last 18 months. And so all of those partners, you know, everybody who was involved in Envision Resilience helped to send this survey out. And so the results are so much more than just Envision Resilience. But just as a reminder, that's the core. That's why we did it in the first place. And maybe that helps explain. And by all means, come back to us and say we want to do it again. But you know, we would be there. We would be here to support you.
Cecil, I think you were reading my mind because I was thinking along the same lines that perhaps this is an effort the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee can undertake as part of its mission for public engagement and information. So that's a really interesting idea to move forward with. I think that one of the things that we would be really interested in is whether attitudes were different in different areas of the island. And perhaps that's something that can be teased out of your results if there were enough responses in enough neighborhoods.
Yeah, and we've got some baseline information about that, Mary, in these two reports. So again, if you think about it as a baseline starting place to be able to compare it as you move forward with your projects, then I think that it will provide some information. I'm not sure that every year is necessary. You know, as you saw, it wasn't, even though we've all been working like crazy over the last 18 months on this topic, the needle didn't change that much from last January to this January. So you might want to think about how you pace it out. It may be because people get tired of taking surveys and tired of answering feeling the exact same way year after year. So you might want to think about, you know, what timing you would employ for the next effort, or maybe you want to dive into some more specific questions within it. I was really interested in, I can't remember, Gary, I think you said, we did ask questions about people's willingness to adopt green energy practices. And I think, to be able to continue to ask those questions as a community is really important as well, because you can't just worry about the effects of climate change. You have to think about how to reduce the impact of climate change. So if we really wanted to spend some more time and energy understanding how the community would react to those sorts of questions, that could be really interesting as well, and something that we could dive into with this survey.
Thank you, Cecil. In the interest of time, I'm going to suggest to Holly and Vince that you reach out to Remain directly with any questions. I do want to make sure we have enough time for the remaining agenda. So thank you for your cooperation there. And thank you to Remain and to the EBP consultants for not only bringing the results today, but also including the questions on the Coastal Resilience Plan. I think that was very valuable information for us. I really do appreciate being part of that process. Next item on the agenda is to begin drafting a recommendation to the Select Board regarding the future composition, mission, and purpose for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. I want to introduce this a little bit. So first, there is always the option of simply requesting that we continue as we are. Right? I didn't mean to suggest that we have to make changes. We could simply ask to be extended for another year or for 2 years or whatever time frame we think is appropriate. Second, I wanted today's discussion to focus on the issues that are time sensitive, which is the composition of the committee, because the Select Board needs to open the request for applications for committee seats. And so the question is, first, will the committee continue to exist? And second, who will be on it? And so there are, of course, many questions that are intertwined. Obviously our mission is a key part of understanding who it is appropriate to be on the committee. But if we can focus today on the issue of who would be on the committee, how long does the committee exist, and what is the structure for the committee, that's where we want to start today. I also want to say that because these are time sensitive, I'm open to continuing to meet on a regular basis, even weekly if necessary, to resolve these questions so that we can provide input to the Select Board. They are going to be announcing in mid-April, so we have only a couple of weeks. We do have several Tuesdays in front of us before our next scheduled meeting. So after we complete this discussion, we'll also discuss our meeting dates coming up for the next several weeks. So having said all that, I'm not going to read the questions that were included in the agenda. I don't see the point in that. Vince, if you want to show them on the screen in case anybody doesn't have a copy. And I would like to hear suggestions from members of the committee about how we should move forward with a recommendation to the Select Board on the committee structure and in continued existence. Sarah?
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, so my personal opinion is that the committee should continue on in some form. So I think to your point about the structure and our kind of goals moving forward, those will probably have to change as we already developed the Coastal Resiliency Plan. But as I see it, and this is once again just my opinion, there's so much in the plan, right? And so and Vince is one person, and so I feel like, first off, what does the Select Board need from us, right, as an advisory committee? What would be beneficial? But I would make the case that we can be a very beneficial committee by assisting, being more hands-on with some of the next steps for the plan. I know that some of that is in some of these questions, like, do we want to, have some level of working with education and outreach? Do we want to have some aspects working towards assisting with grant writing and implementation? I think there's just looking at the members of the current committee, which obviously may change, there's a lot of talent on this committee in many different areas. So there's people that have experience with different types of grant writing. There's people who have a lot of different experience with finance, and you know who you are. And I think that without volunteering any one person, I think that we can be tapped to use our specific skills to assist in the movement forward. So far, we have been doing a lot of learning about the issues, a lot of input and discussions, but I feel like we have an exciting next step to be more action oriented. I would like to stay on and participate in more of the action moving forward. And so that's just my, personal opinion, that I think that I don't know what it takes to be a permanent committee versus not a permanent committee, but there's so much work to be done in this realm. I think it really is imperative that not only the crack exists, but that the members that are represented here exist. So, the different groups that are represented here as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Joanna?
Thank you, Mary. I agree with Sarah. I absolutely think the committee should continue. I think that some of the conversation, for example, some of these questions, right? Advisory committee, oversight committee, regulatory function. It is my understanding that in order for us to become a regulatory board, that is a change to the town charter, and that requires a home rule petition. So that is not probably something that can happen quickly or easily, right? In terms of how we move forward, I would like to see everyone who is on the committee stay on the committee. I think that we have worked well together. I think, Mary, you've done a great job as the chairperson. But I do think that we could explore adding a couple of other people from the town, right? That would, I think, benefit from being part of these conversations, both us and them. And then I think, to Sarah's point, we could also have a couple of subcommittees, right? If there's a grant subcommittee and potentially a finance subcommittee, then I think that you would really harness the talent of the people who are on this call in a way that would be more action oriented.
Thank you, Joanna. Peter?
Okay, I agree with what Sarah and Joanna said. I want to say, as someone who participated in the design thinking workshop, seeing firsthand how involved the town administration is now, how they get it, they're on board. We don't necessarily have to form all kinds of subcommittees. For instance, they have a public outreach person. We can recommend that they do certain things and help us out, and that's funded by the town already. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can farm things out. And then I want to say, I'll stay on the board. I want the board to stay intact. I don't think we should be regulatory. I'll stay on the board as long as I'm on SHAB. So.
Thank you, Peter. I am going to call on each member. Gary, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I do, but my thoughts aren't quite what some of my colleagues have been thinking about. When I was thinking about it and looking at those questions, which are terrific questions, I started thinking that perhaps having done such a terrific job that we have been doing over the last couple of years, but knowing that the likelihood of us having any regulatory authority is minimal, that I started thinking perhaps our functions ought to be the responsibility of an existing committee or board that has the power, such as the Planning Committee or the Economic Planning and Development Committee, because they have the power to do stuff. We get frustrated sometimes because we sit here talking about all the things that are important, and then we see at these other committee meetings, they go ahead and do this stuff, and some of the concerns that we have in some of our views are not taking into consideration, and we're kind of frustrated about it, or I am at least, And how come they approve that? And why don't they change the rules? Why don't we, why don't we just stop that development? We can't do that, and we'll never have that authority. I'm saying, well, why don't we change the responsibility of this committee to someone that does have the authority, like, say, the planning board? And then they could actually say, not only are we talking about planning generally, we're talking about planning and coastal resilience. So that's some of the thoughts I had over the last few days thinking about this, is that maybe if we can't get any regulatory authority, maybe it ought to be transferred to one of the committees that exist today that can make decisions that prevent development or changes that we are hoping to have occur. I know that's not a favorite choice for all of you folks here, but otherwise, I think we'll continue being advisory and helping the town a great deal, but being a little bit frustrated from time to time when things get approved in other hearings that we have no control over.
Peter?
Yeah, I want to say to Gary's comments, in terms of being frustrated as advisory board, again, the design thinking workshop, I sat in group one in between Vince and Libby Gibson, and the DPW director was there. There was the someone from the planning board. Matt Fee was in our group. We had quite a diverse group, and I don't think we're going to be ignored, to be honest. They know we created a plan. They know we represent all the various groups. They're going to listen to us. They're going to look to us. I don't think it's a thing where we're just going to be pushed aside and we're not going to gain any traction. Of course, there's going to be times when we come up with things that they're going to say we're crazy or whatever, but they want to work. That's what I saw. I saw that, whereas us as a board, maybe we felt like in the beginning, we created our suggestions for the various regulatory boards to think about coastal resilience when applications come in, and please think about these things. I think we're beyond that, and we're to the point where it's going to be, things will become things that you have to do for coastal resilience will be part of planning going forward. And I think it's a mistake to give the planning board, the regulatory power that we wish to enforce, because there are some members of that board that don't necessarily think in the vein of climate change as a reality and sea level rise as a problem. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Peter. I also want to ask Matt for input.
Yeah, I think even if, I agree with most of what's said. I think we should continue. I think the idea of going to the planning board, et cetera, would be great if we could, offload this to someone else and disband. But I think the reality is we're going to end up being the group that keeps pushing. We're going to be the watchdogs, and this group will also be the ones that will keep some of the things on, on track. The one thing I will say, when in the questions, there was a comment about sustainability. We're working on having a sustainability office and someone in that. I'd be a little worried about us not focusing on the big stuff. Sometimes when it's human nature. If you have, more popular, easier things, you go and deal with those. And I think that this committee should be trying to deal with the hard, unpopular things first. And, over time, and so I worry that if we start dealing with sustainability, we'll get sidetracked from some of the real tough issues, the low-lying areas in the zoning and some of the larger projects. I think those are really important. And the town is, they're overwhelmed. Some of the other committees, if we're counting on other people to do it, some of them are just underwater and overwhelmed. And from what I can see, I don't think it's going to get any better in the next decade or so with the lack of housing and the loss of housing. I think we're in this for a while. So I think that this committee is absolutely important. maybe subcommittees as we identify financing and other issues, those can be broken out and people added to deal with that. I know the town knows it has to do that too. So I think the suggestion to add a couple other people for administration is a good one, especially on certain topics. So, I think we're heading the right way. And over time, this committee will evolve, is my guess. This isn't going away. This is going to be something that's going to be underway for, for our lifetimes. So I think this committee will evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Vince, do you want to add some comments? Also, any context about different kinds of committees would be helpful.
I have a kind of an idea that just occurred to me that I suppose is kind of open to the committee, but also partially, I guess, directed towards Matt to see if he could offer any input. I don't know how this works. I frankly don't. This committee is meant to send advice to the select board, and that's the main function. But a kind of question for Matt, I have no idea if this is even possible. Could this committee send advice to the select board for other committees, or to distribute to other committees for the sake of argument, provided, say, within the regulatory function of that committee or within that committee's ability to deal with?
I'm not sure the answer, Vince. I assume we could advise them to advise anybody. The difficulty that the select board has sometimes is if you advise, the planning board or the Concom or someone else, they get their backs up, and say, well, don't tell us how to do our job. Even if they ask us to do their job, then we go to do it. They tell us not to do it. So it's kind of a catch-22. Anyway, so I don't, I think we could, but I think we have to be aware that sometimes there are silos. I think our job should be breaking down some of those silos. We should be bringing together this group and the planning board, et cetera, this group and Concom, and trying to find solutions that, everyone thinks is their idea, rather than, sort of the select board telling people what to do. So.
Thank you, Matt. That was part of the motivation behind some of the questions when I saw that the work group was comprised of both town department members and committee members. And with the Coastal Resilience Plan's suggestion for an interdepartmental working group, that suggestion is specific to town staff. It did not include any of the committees. And the Arcadis workshop of a couple of weeks ago, bringing both groups together, I thought was really valuable. And the question in my mind was, how are we going to have communication between various committees and various town departments, all of whom are interested in working towards solutions for various coastal resilience issues? And so, some of the things I'm hearing are in the same kind of vein. Is, how are we going to be able to communicate with other committees and with other town departments? And that's why I wondered, should we expand the membership to include more of them? Should we suggest a change to the idea of the interdepartmental working group to include committees in that group as well? Should there be different committees? To Gary's point, should the functions of this committee be assigned to other committees? There are lots of thoughts that we can have in that direction. So that was part of the reason for including them. I am hearing a consensus among the people who spoke that we should definitely continue to exist. Can I get any suggestions about what we would ask for? A one-year extension, a status to be made permanent, an extension for a number of years greater than one, rolling terms, that the appointments are staggered, or continuing to appoint the entire committee all at once. Anyone have thoughts on those questions? Joanna?
I would recommend that we continue on permanently, right, in the form that we are, and that the selectmen can appoint us as they appoint the other committees on the town where they call for applications. We could easily have rolling terms. And I think some of what, both you and Vince are saying is really important. I walked away from the workshop also thinking the same thing. I felt that our voice was more heard versus less heard. And I think it's a strength, frankly, that we are not an advisory committee or a regulatory committee right now. because that would put us in a different position with different requirements. And I think that we should see ourselves as influencers. And I think that in some ways that is a better position. So I was encouraged by that. I mean, very similar to what Peter thought. I sat in a very diverse group. I do think that there should be more representation, whether it's on this large committee or whether it's in subcommittees, from a couple of town employees who have sort of the vested interest in ensuring that these actions get carried out, right? And I think that, and Vince, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would support your job, right? If there were some folks, I'm thinking about Chuck or Jeff, who served on some of these subcommittees, or for example, Rick came to the finance group, right, who could really help to figure out, is what we're saying achievable, and what is the timeline, and what kind of support do you need?
Thank you, Joanna. I'm going to make a comment before I forget. All of us individually have the opportunity to attend any committee meeting and offer comment as a member of the public. So we shouldn't forget that we have that ability if we want to be influencers, I think was the word Joanna used. Peter and then Vince.
Yes, I just want to say one more thing about regulatory. The moment we become regulatory is the moment we enter controversy, because then we have the power to make a decree, to make a change that's binding, and then we attract people who will attack us, and we end up in the newspaper, and we end up, the pariah of, the community Facebook page. Whereas if we're advisory, we're a bunch of really smart people from all walks of life of Nantucket, representing lots of different groups, sitting over here in the corner doing our thing, and when we're ready, we kick out the proposal that goes to the select board, and we have a select board member on here, so we know how to make that proposal, and then the select board can take the heat. Like, people can say, oh, it came from those guys from that advisory board, but the select board, they're on the hook for it. I also think that, we don't necessarily have to expand to a much bigger board. As we're working on things, we invite the department heads and the committee chairs to come to the meetings while we're working on it. Say, can the DPW chief come to the next 3 meetings, because we really need you to help us develop that. But he doesn't have to commit to being a committee member, because we may bore him for the rest of the time. So that's what I was thinking.
Thank you, Peter. Vince?
Thank you. So Joanna has a really good point. I love it. I kind of want to see if we might be able to pursue it. And Peter is exactly right as well. I get advice from people as I need it. And I don't mean to tell you how my little desk area here works, but the phone here on my desk, not to name too many names, but Holly is speed dial 1, Chuck is speed dial 2, and the DPW director is speed dial 3. And then I knock on the wall here for Jeff Carlson. So my job is a coordinator. I am supposed to coordinate between people and departments. I sometimes feel like I've just got one foot in natural resources and another toe in admin and another toe over in DPW, and moving around and talking to people constantly to try and get this. But Joanna's point is still well received. Could we have more involvement and higher level involvement from other departments as needed? Whether it's, as Peter says, through invites or through, I don't know, would a different revolving structure work, where we get these people in a slightly more permanent basis, like how to say revolving members on, say, planning board work? I don't know, I'm just pitching an idea.
Thank you, Vince. Joanna? Joanna, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm just going to piggyback on what Vince said. It's almost like it would be beneficial to us maybe to consider like workshopping ideas like once a month and inviting a group, right? So instead we would have maybe consider a meeting schedule of twice a month on Tuesdays, but then have a third Tuesday, take our 2-hour block, identify an idea or 2 ideas, invite in other people and workshop the idea. Right. And that's how we could influence the outcome. right? But we need, to your point, Mary, like some kind of structure for that.
Thank you, Joanna. It's an interesting concept. So Vince, do you have suggestions about how we proceed with writing a recommendation? Is that something where, you know, you would put that together, and if should people send you, you know, their thoughts about committee structure? Or is that something we should work out in the committee meeting?
Good question. I'd welcome some feedback, to be honest, and take say a week maybe, or 2 weeks to do the feedback, and allow time for the 3 committee members that weren't here today to watch the recording, look at what was said in this portion, and also be able to contribute themselves. I need as much feedback as I can get, to be very honest and open about it. Then I can try and compile something together. And then I don't know, Mary, what do you think? You and I review it before we send it to the committee again?
Well, I think we would have to have a vote in the committee. So, you know, we'll definitely have to bring it back for another meeting. And I'm very mindful of the fact that 3 of our members are not here today, and I do want to get their input. Let me pause on that question, Vince, because we do have 2 hands up, and we'll come back to that. Sarah, and then Matt.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I just want to, you know, go back to, I think, thinking of all these different ideas of how the CRAC committee moving forward. I just want to posit again that I think that we can be an area for action. I think, you know, information gathering, like Vince was saying about going to different department heads. I think all of these things are great. I think we just want to make sure what our goal is, right? Like, what is the end game, or what is our goal for CRAC? And for a long time, it was the Coastal Resiliency Plan. So I think being really clear what the goals of the committee are, whether it's, you know, specific actions with that or within the plan, or we're a sounding board that community members can come to. I think that's great. I think that, like what Joanna was saying about like workshopping ideas for action, I think that is also great. I think those can be incorporated into our regular meetings, because otherwise, what are our regular meetings about? If we're, you know, so I think that all these great, I just really want to make a big case for we are action oriented.
Thank you, Sarah. Matt?
Yeah, I think our goal should be plan implementation. There's a bunch of recommendations that still need work, so those will have to be worked on going forward. My suggestion would be to ask for an extension for a year or 2 years, and then work out within this group sort of you know, a time, you know, who's going to go for 2 years. So sort of set the pattern up so we aren't all leaving on the same year, and then give that as a recommendation to the select board to adopt. You know, we could work out the details here, who's up for, you know, if we've got every 2 years, I don't know, whatever the numbers are, we figure out the details of making this a standing committee with a couple people appointed every year. And but we could do that ourselves, give that recommendation over, and the select board would likely adopt it. So I think we do the work here and just say, here's what we'd like. Here are the names, here you go. And I think the select board would adopt it.
Thank you, Matt. Holly, and then Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, as a quasi, I guess, staff member, I think this committee has done a awesome job, obviously facilitating with Arcadis moving forward on a coastal resiliency plan. And obviously this committee was created out of our MVP program. Vince was hired out of that. And yes, it was done to create the coastal resiliency plan, but your work doesn't stop there. Now that we have an actual living, breathing document that is good for the vision of the next 50 years, the work doesn't stop. Having this committee help facilitate, whether it's through subcommittees of granting processes, or it's those public outreach that, as we saw through what Remain's done, I see them as a vital component. That survey, I think, would be very beneficial. through the little bit of projects or those low-lying fruits I think we were all talking about in the workshop, of how we can show that we're actually moving towards the goals and objectives of the Coastal Resiliency Plan, as well as all the other plans that we have, the Hazard Mitigation Plan, our MVP report, all these different things that all are tied in together. There is definitely room for this committee to help advise and advocate for resiliency on a broader spectrum, as well as to see those projects move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Holly. And we'll go to Gary, and then I'll try and remember what my thought was in reaction to yours. Thank you.
I'm just really a question. Assuming the committee continues, I think that since we started, we've only had one person leave and one new appointment, which was Joanna, and that was an appointment to a position at large. My recollection was when we first were formed, the different organizations were asked to provide someone. They weren't picked by the town manager. Am I incorrect about that? I thought that the various organizations was head like CHAB or like the Coastal Conservancy were asked to pick a member, and they did. So is that going to change in the future, do we think, so that in the future the town manager will pick, or will we still go to the various groups that the town wants represented and ask them to provide someone on a
Gary,
continuing
you're absolutely right. So each group that is represented on our committee has the ability every year, or probably at any time, to change who their representative is. We saw that early on with some of the committees that had to make a change. It's, they have that ability. The select board would not control that. There are 3 at-large seats that are appointed by the select board. The main change would be is if we requested to increase the membership, then whether we were asking for certain organizations to have a representative or other seats to be added, that would be a question of how those people would be selected. But no, I don't think that we are contemplating any changes in how the people who are currently representing other organizations on this committee would be selected.
Okay.
And Holly, I remembered the question that you raised. The other plans that you mentioned, the hazard mitigation plan and some of the other environmental plans, do those plans have committees that champion them, or is it simply a staff member or nobody or a department? How are those plans move forward?
I can speak for the hazard mitigation plan. So as the coordinator, basically it's all the different priorities that were associated have particular departments throughout the town that are the front runner, if you will, for that particular item. Some have multiple departments included with a certain priority. And it's up to them to achieve them within our 5 years that we have until we have to update the plan again, which will be requesting some federal funding to do that again for the planning and updating phase. But that's pretty much how that works. I will say in the beginning, it was a lot more involvement as far as staff goes, meeting, but a lot of that had to do with resiliency, right? Resiliency really came out of our discussions of hazard mitigation plan and how do we move forward. So a lot of the key staff members are pretty much the same. Myself, Vince, Chuck, Greg, Jeff. We all kind of, get together, Lauren, even from a climate perspective with energy. We're all under that same kind of, resiliency, sustainability configuration, if you will. I can't really speak for the other plans, but again, the Coastal Resiliency Plan was something that was a priority out of the hazard mitigation plan. So, Vince was able to kind of check that regulatory box off the plan for me, and us as a community. And just for those that are not familiar with the hazard mitigation plan, that's what gives us the federal funding if we ever have a natural disaster. And without having an updated plan, we're limited on those federal funding. So it's always imperative for us to make sure it's updated. Are we achieving those priorities? What are the reasons why some priorities have trickled actually down from the original 2007 HMP into the current HMP, actually, and crossed over into the CRP. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because that really shows that these are priorities, and those are specifically, I'll mention this for the public, are the culvert concerns for Nantucket Road, Fulling Mill and Sacajah Pond on Pulpus Road. Those are priorities in the HMP that have actually gone into the CRP. So those will be priorities that Vince and I will obviously want it to champion it, some grants on, and try to double dip, if you will, try to work on a lot of these different things that have been addressed in both plans. So I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. 'Cause one of the elements of our charge was to identify overlapping areas. And that's sort of what I'm wondering is, again, with the focus being accomplished for the CRP, should we be trying to help with coordination between departments, between other plans, because many of these do overlap. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I do appreciate the person who commented that, stick with the hard stuff because that needs to get done, as opposed to picking off some of the easy elements that are a little bit outside the focus. Further thoughts or questions? Okay, let me take a quick look at the questions. So essentially, for the members present today, we all want the committee to continue. We don't have concrete suggestions on how the membership would change, but we do have a commitment to the current membership, so not removing any seats. There's a request to become a permanent committee. Can I get a quick feedback from the group, permanent as opposed to 1 year or multiple years? So just quick show of hands, I guess, from the 6 of us. Permanent, show of hands. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'll join, that's 6. So I think that's what we're asking for. We're asking to be made permanent rather than renewed every year, to continue with the current seats. The question, we might leave it up to the select board of whether they wanted to have 3 at-large seats all at once, or if they wanted to stagger those terms. I don't see any major difference between them other than just running the same way as every other committee runs, with staggered terms, and not doing a full clean slate replacement. Any other suggestions that we would want to make to the select board specifically about the committee structure? We had a brief discussion of regulatory, which is probably not appropriate. There's not a regulation waiting for us to enforce. So there would first have to be new regulations. But Vince, can you talk briefly about the Oversight Committee status?
Yep. So oversight committees have more power. They can have budgets if they're given money. They can make very set decisions if that's possible. It would need enacting legislation. The example for oversight committees in the boards, committees and commissions handbook is a grants committee that works through the high school, or the Land Bank Commission. They both need enabling legislation. So that is something else that would have to be considered. Joanna actually brought all this up earlier. So I'm not trying to just be repetitive. She already covered this. But it is a method that would allow the committee some of the more, the greater ability to have take action that people have discussed here as well. But that's the kind of thing that would take probably a few years to probably get enacting legislation in place, but it is certainly a possibility. The other thing that, that oversight committees can do is you can own and possess land, but I don't know if that's necessarily anything this committee is interested in.
We have so many land owning agencies here. I don't think we need to add one. And I don't know how that would work. So other thoughts? All right. I want to discuss the meeting schedule in this context, and then we'll come back to the remaining items on the agenda. So what is the pleasure of the group today? Do we need to meet, let's say, in 2 weeks outside of our normal schedule? That would be early April. It would be April 5th, if I'm looking at it correctly. The issue, we have 5 weeks in March, so we have a 3-week break between now and our next scheduled meeting, which is April 12th. And I don't think that that would give the town administration enough time to incorporate our recommendation into their call for committees, because that's about when they'll be issuing it. So my suggestion would be to meet either March 29th or April 5th to finalize, to vote on a recommendation. That would hopefully give enough time for the members who are not here to provide input to Vince, and we would prepare a draft resolution to come back for a vote. How do people feel about that? And is anybody, Vince, and while Vince is talking, if you can check your calendars for either March 29 or April 5th, just to let us know if you're not available. Vince?
Just a simple note on March 29th. I'm sure I'll be able to make it. I do have another whole day commitment that day. Some of us here in the department have to go put up bird fencing, and it's like a 4-day event, and it's going to be the 21st to the 24th. So I'm going to be quite busy those few days. But if I have to make it work for a committee meeting, I guess I can.
Okay. Sarah?
I would prefer not the 29th. The April 4th would be my preferred date, but I technically could be available, but
Okay.
because then it's just, we've been meeting every single week then for, so be great to not.
Yeah. Joanna?
I agree. I would prefer to the whatever the next Tuesday is, not the 29th.
All right, so it sounds like we're meeting April 5th, and then because we do have so much on our plate, I would assume we are also meeting April 12th and 26th on our regular schedule. Does that sound all right to everyone here? Okay, seeing some thumbs up. All right, thank you. So continuing now to public comment. Are there members of the public that have a comment at this time? You can use either the raise hand feature, but I can see everybody on the screen. So if you want to just unmute yourself, that's fine too. All right, if there's none, we have approval of the minutes. Vince, can you put the February 22nd minutes on the screen?
Getting there now. If it's okay, Mary, I'll take it from the start, if that's all right. Everyone see this?
Yep.
Couple of very minor edits, if I can fly through them quickly. Just
I did notice that Jen Carber's name was misspelled throughout.
I will correct.
It just needs a G on the end. Yeah.
Yes, I will correct it throughout. I just made a note for myself. My simple notes are, I added the link to the 9 core principles from the chat with Courtney Rocha. I just want to correct this. It's $300,000, not 200,000. Is that okay? I don't think that anyone will mind that, but that's the figure we've been discussing. And oh yes, I need to correct this. I went back and watched the recording. I made this note like weeks ago, but I went back and checked the recording. I never mentioned Trevor Johnson, and I didn't mention any name, but it was Kate Edwards, Jen Lackmer, and I who presented to CONCOM about the about Baxter Road at the CONCOM workshop. They're the corrections I need to make.
Any questions or discussion? I'll take a motion to approve the minutes with Vince's annotations.
So moved.
Thank you, Joanna. Second, Gary, thank you. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Hi.
Peter Brace,
Staying.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Joanna Roach
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Those are approved with one abstention. And Vince, when you're ready, the minutes from March, what day was it?
15th.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might have shared the wrong thing. Beg your pardon. March 15th. There it is. Okay, can I run through a couple of minor
Yes.
changes again? The usuals, put in the meeting link, put in the presentation that I did. And then I just wanted to add to the end of one sentence just for clarification. It's the low projection was, I guess removed might be the wrong word, was updated. Can I change that to updated? And
Yeah.
6.66 feet is now projected for 2021 under the adjusted 22 high scenario.
Okay, so we need to add the ED on adjusted because it doesn't make sense the way it's written. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you're going to update, or you're going to change remove to update it. Okay.
I think that's everything I had, yes.
Any further comments or questions on the minutes from the 15th? If not, we'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second,
Peter is a second there. Roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. Those are approved. New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports. Vince, you want to tell us briefly about the report to the select board you're preparing?
Sure, I'm just going to have to stop sharing. I already did. Never mind, I got to find this now. So back in the beginning of January, we had a discussion at a crack meeting about, here it is, about a quarterly report. So on April 1st, Friday, April 1st, I'm going to start assembling the quarterly report. So it's going to be a general call, which for at this point now, for anything you'd like included. The things that I'm going to be talking about on the day, in the report that is going to go to this committee, obviously. We're going to be looking generally at what kind of actions happened in the last 3 months, January, February, March, any wins, cracks to-do list, and any asks that crack can put forward to the select board, anything that we wish to get done. And I guess that will also may include at some point later the discussion from point 5 in the agenda today about what the committee's future is. But the things that I'm looking at are the undertaking recommendation 1.8, the shoreline change monitoring program that we've recently started. That's going to be part of it. The grant conversations with MVP and CZM that happened at 2 separate committee meetings a month ago and today. Information about a letter of interest that I did for BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, for their DTA, Direct Technical Assistance. And I'm also going to be talking about how we had Bob Davis at the Steamship Authority on January 25th. And obviously we're going to have a little piece, a paragraph or two, whatever it needs to be, on the workshop as it was presented here a week ago. If there's anything you think I'm missing that needs to be put in, absolutely, all suggestions, everything welcome. Once I have some draft worked out after April 1st, I'll send it around to the committee. I don't know what format it will be, and if, I don't know, maybe Mary or somebody else might wish to review it first before it goes around, I'm open to all those suggestions.
Yeah, so anything you want to suggest that Vince cover, probably directly send him an email with a topic or a few sentences that you might suggest. And this is something that he will continue to prepare on a quarterly basis to keep the select board apprised of what's going on at our meetings and how we're progressing in general on the Coast Resilience Plan. So not just the Coast Resilience Advisory Committee, but the plan itself, since there are many elements that we won't be directly involved in. Any other committee updates? No, okay. The other note, I did confirm with Erica Mooney that we do have permission to continue meeting remotely through July 15th from the state. So we will continue to meet remotely and we'll see what happens for July. Any further comments or questions? If not, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt.
Second,
Thank you, Sarah. Roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre. Aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks on the 5th.
Thanks, everyone. Just going to stop this recording.
Okay.